as we start our study in the book of Romans. And so we read through chapter 1 through 7 is where we got to it. The introduction that Paul tends to do on his books. He talks about who he is, somewhat of what his qualification is or why he's speaking, and a prayer and a blessing to those that he's writing to. And so tonight I figured we would try to work through 8 through 17. My Bible titles this Paul's longing to visit Rome. Does anybody say anything different?
Prayer of thanks.
Prayer of thanks. All right. And so this is 8. It's about, what do you got here? 9 verses long. And so if I could get somebody to read 5 and 4, if you could read 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Somebody would read 8 through 12, that would be appreciated.
First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve in my spirit and in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness how constantly I remember you in my prayers at all times, and I pray that now, at least by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith.
All right, and then 13 through 17.
Brothers and sisters, I want you to know that I planned many times to come to you, but this has not been possible. I wanted to come so that I could help you grow spiritually as I have helped the other non-Jewish people. I have a duty to all people, Greeks and those who are not Greeks, the wise and the foolish. That's why I want so much to preach the good news to you in Rome. I am not ashamed of the good news, because it is the power of God uses to save everyone who believes, to save the Jews first, and then to save the non-Jews. The good news shows how God makes people right with himself, that it begins and ends with faith. As the scripture says, but those who are right with God will live by faith.
All right, and so we see Paul beginning to talk about what it is that his hopes are, what it is that his dreams are. We take a look at this. Chapter 1, verse 8 says, "First I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world." So he gives them this positive buildup. And you can see that that's kind of how he writes his books. He tries to get them, you can see some pattern as well through the way the Spirit spoke to the churches in the first, in the 7 churches in Revelation, where it praised them, then it kind of chastised them, told them what they should do. Well, Paul kind of uses that same concept here. He talks about to all in Rome who are loved by God and called to be his holy people, 7, who he's writing to. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ, who offers a little benediction to him. And then he says, "First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world." He praises them, because we see, as we hear about Paul's very good at roping people in. Paul's very good at writing that where he'll capture his audience. And he starts with a positive. He starts with something good. Right? We should all take lessons from Paul when it talks about writing letters, when it talks about engaging with people, because he starts out with this positive note. Even when he was writing the letter about Onesimus, right? He started it out with a praise, and he started it out with congeniality. And he's kind of how he starts out here. Your faith is being reported all the world. That he's telling them, listen, we've heard of you. We've seen what's happening here. We understand how good you are working, how hard you are working, how faithful you are working here. Verse 9 says, "God, whom I serve in my spirit, is preaching the gospel of his Son. It is my witness how constantly I remember you in my prayers." God, whom I serve in my spirit in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness how constantly I remember you in prayers and in my prayers at all times. And I pray now that at last, by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. So he's telling them that he wants to come to Rome. He has heard all that they're doing. And he has this within his heart. He has this within his drive. This is his driving force, right? In my spirit, in preaching the gospel. God whom I serve in my spirit in preaching the gospel of the Son is my witness. He said, this is what I'm looking to do. This is what I'm wanting to do. This is what my driving force of my life is, right? So Paul's driving force is preaching the word. That's what he's focused on. That's where his energies lie. And he wants to do what? He is asking God, he's telling God that he remembers it all the time, and he's asking God's will to open up the door for him to come. Because what does it say? What's it come down through? He says, obviously, he's not had the opportunity to. And I would argue that Paul might be saying in this particular area that he has sought the opportunity to come to Rome, but some way, somehow, God has blocked it. He believes that all of this is from God. All of his direction is from God. And if he has asked and prayed that he could come there and hasn't made it there yet, we see kind of that next thought down here, verse 11. I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gifts to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want to be unaware, brothers and sisters. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been what? Prevented from doing so until now. And so a lot of the commentaries make note that say that this is Paul saying that God has held him back from being able to come to this. See, that Paul is saying that he believes that he has been limited in his ability to reach Rome. That is his goal. He wants to get to Rome. We know at some point he says he wants to appeal before Caesar. He wants to bring the message to Caesar. But he's writing to Rome, the Romans here. And who's he writing to when he writes this? Remember, he's writing to Jews and Gentiles, and he's writing to the believers there. And so he's talking to people that are already within the faith. And I think it's interesting. What do you think if you read verse 11? I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gifts to make you strong. What's he saying there? What do you think he's talking about with spiritual gifts? What do you think? You're being very quiet. What are considered spiritual gifts? What do you think he's talking about there?
I would say preaching, healing.
Mm-hmm. Is that the kind of spiritual gift that we're talking about? I would think so, wouldn't you? Based on the time period and what goes on back there, the apostles are kind of able to kind of share their gift forward. They're kind of able to impart that upon somebody else. And so what would he do here? He'd say, I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. To make you strong. What is the purpose of the spiritual gift? Why did they have the ability of healing or tongues or prophecy or preaching or whatever it happens to be? What was the purpose of those gifts?
Well, I think it was to help convert people to a believer.
Mm-hmm. What did it do? What were the purpose of the spiritual gifts at the time? The purpose of the spiritual gifts during that time period was to impart the power of God so people would see that they are truly from God, right? The ability to do these things, the ability to heal, the ability to speak in tongues, the ability to prophesy was all believed to have come from God. And so when it came from God, if you had that, then you were considered to be a representative of God. Is there another type of spiritual gift? I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. Is he talking about just the spiritual gifts of these particular, I'm going to use magical things, right? Where it's prophecy and it's healing and it's whatnot like that and speaking in tongues. What other kind of spiritual gift might you give somebody? Could it be he's talking about just building them up?
Well, he goes on to say that they might encourage each other.
Yes.
So encouragement would be part of that.
I would agree. Verse 12 says, that is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. Verse 13, I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I may have a harvest among you, just as I have had among the other Gentiles. So what's he saying there? He said, I'm wanting to come, I've been trying to come, I've been blocked from coming to get there. But what's his purpose?
Timing's right.
When it's the best time, right?
When we talk about the harvest, that's something you relate to. It's time to pick the crops, or it's time to get the work done. So I think it's all about timing.
Well, when do you harvest? When it's right? You harvest the good crop, right? And so he's looking to harvest a crop in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I've had among the other Gentiles. So we see that Paul is starting to kind of direct his conversation just a little bit towards who? Towards the Gentiles. He's pushing it towards the Gentiles. And he said, so he's alluding to, he's had success.
He's been busy.
Yeah. Preaching to the Gentiles.
Yeah, got there yet.
That's right. And he's looking, where is the center of the Roman world? Well, Rome is. So he wants the opportunity to come bring the faith to them, and he knows that he'll have a harvest. He's saying, hey, I'm just going to reap this harvest here, and among other Gentiles. Verse 14, I'm obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, right? So he starts to hammer that just a little bit. Not harshly, not hard. He's just continuing to kind of tap on that to say, listen, here, I'm here to see the Gentiles as much as I'm here to see the Jews. Here he hits it again. I want to have a harvest among the Gentiles. He continuously hits that note. And then down there he said, I'm obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both the wise and the foolish. That is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. So who does this encompass? Who is Paul saying he's going to speak to? Everybody. That is an excellent response. Everybody. He wants to talk to everybody. He wants to talk to everybody. Anybody and everybody. Both the Greeks and the non-Greeks. Both to the wise and the foolish. I'm here to preach. He said, I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. So everyone who is in Rome. I'm going to bring my message to everybody, including everybody that might be in Rome. Rome with me. Okay. What do you think about that? Down to 15. Any thoughts on that section so far? Why do you think he would put that next sentence in there? Verse 16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel.
Jew.
Say again?
Because he's a Jew.
Maybe.
Because he's not afraid to be persecuted. He's been persecuted several
Mhm.
times. He's willing to stand up.
Well, who was Paul? You have to remember who Paul was as well. What was Paul's first name? Saul. What was Saul known for the most? Persecution of the Christians. This devil-led belief in this false Messiah that is causing all this hubbub and trauma within the Jewish faith and within all these synagogues and all these communities within the Roman Empire. Is causing all of this trouble. This was the guy that went out and tried to squash it. Now, you think he's had any difficulty with that?
Of course. Half of them still scared of it.
I would argue there's a lot of people might still be scared of him. And so what's he?
That's why he's doing this.
Mhm.
He's getting them prepared and telling them that he's coming for good now,
Yeah.
not for
That's
bad.
why he has to defend himself at every beginning. Every letter he starts, everywhere he goes, he has to explain himself.
that may be a big part of it. He may be trying to justify why they don't need to be afraid of him, who he is, right? He says, here I am. I have been chosen by God. That is my life's ambition, to preach the word. I'm here to not just preach it to the Jews, but I'm also here to preach it to the Gentiles and pretty much anybody that walks on the face of the planet. And guess what? I'm not ashamed of what I'm preaching. I'm not ashamed of what I'm talking about. He steps up. Who knows what they're dealing with in Rome? Rome was not necessarily friendly to Christians, to the Jesus religion, what was actually called the Way, through a whole lot of that particular area, it was not positively looked upon. They were looked upon. You already had the Jews who caused trouble. Now you have the Christians, or the Way, within that also causing what? Trouble. Now they're not trying to cause trouble. It's really the Jews are wrapping around them trying to say they're causing all this trouble, but the Jews are the ones really causing the trouble overall. The Sanhedrin, the leadership, are causing most of this trouble. Who knows what they're dealing with? But he states it very plainly, I am not afraid or ashamed of the gospel. And why am I not ashamed of it? Because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. The gospel brings us our salvation to those who believe. To who? It was delivered first to who? First the Jews. They didn't accept it necessarily. And then to who? Jew, then Greek, right? Or non-Jews. I think non-Jews is a great way to do it. First the Jews, then the Gentiles. Does that still leave the Jews? Is this talking about present day? Or is it for them? Or is this just an understanding of how the flow of the message had been sent out? Is he coming to preach it to the Jews first within Rome? And then the Greeks? Or is this what he's saying? That this gospel that brings salvation to everyone who believes, is he talking about he's going to do that there? Or is he talking about what has already occurred? Is that a past tense or a present tense? What do you think? Is that convoluted enough for you?
I think he's saying, he's referencing past tense because he's coming to talk to everybody.
Right. I think I would agree to that. I think he's just talking about...
He's saying it's the same message that it was first brought to the Jews, and now he's bringing it to both sides.
Absolutely. The message was first delivered to the Jews. And then it was brought down to the Greeks as well. Why was it brought to the Greeks? I'd argue that it's been that plan for the entire time.
Yeah.
Right? Because when in the beginning we were what? We were one people, right? We were Adam and Eve, for that matter. We were just one people. And we see that circle, as we talked about in Revelations, we all come back to being what? One people again. We all become one. We become believers under God and in His protection and His salvation in heaven. So what's he telling them there? It says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel because of the power. I'm not ashamed of it because of the power. It's the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. First to the Jew, then to the Gentile. First it came here, now it comes here. Yet again, he's hammering that. You're going to see him knock that door over and over and over, that he's continuing that I am here to bring it, not just to the Jews, but to the Gentiles, the non-Jews. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. And so what is that faith? So faith, where do you get your faith?
The Word of God.
In the gospel, right? Word of God. Now, interesting thing is, all they've got is the gospel at the time other than the Old Testament because they don't have what? They don't have this nifty Bible from the NIV and Zondervan that I have right here, right? They don't have any of that. All they have is the Word is spoken and written, but it's not set up in the way that we have it right now. And so, righteousness by faith, from first lesson is written, the righteousness will live by faith. Faith in what? Faith in the gospel. What is the gospel? That Jesus is the Son of God. And He is the Messiah. Is that how you spell Messiah? Close enough. That's the message. The righteous will live by faith. Faith in what? Faith in the gospel. All right, so thoughts on this? That 8 through 17. Y'all think it's pretty cut and dried? What do you think? Any thoughts on it?
I think it's like a pep talk for them, trying to get them fired up about him coming, and he's excited to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know it would have took a while for the word to spread.
Mm-hmm. Which word? That he was
He's coming. That Paul was coming to talk to them.
Mm-hmm. You know, they didn't have DHL, right?
No radio, no internet, no
FedEx,
so
no.
If he just showed up, it might take weeks or months to gather, people that wanted to listen. But if he tells them ahead of time, they can kind of be passing the word around, and then they all get ready for him to come.
I'm always interested to figure out how much of the letters, when they're written, where they're sent, how many of these letters have since been copied and carried to other towns? Have people heard about him? Have people heard about his conversion? Have people heard about his story and his conversion on the road to Damascus, and how this guy who was first, what's the word I'm looking for? Persecuting us, is now one of the biggest proponents of the message of faith. And so just wonder how much he's having to set things up. He talks to him like he knows them, though. Do you get that feeling from the letter? Do you get that feeling that it's written like he's already had communication with him? He's had some kind of interaction of some sort with them? I don't know. What do you think? It's a very personal letter. He's very praiseworthy. Would it be uncomfortable? How do you all trust a letter you get from some random person that just starts praising you that you don't know? You ever get those letters? Hey, you're a great guy. It's like the Facebook messages where some person you haven't heard from in 100 years all of a sudden decides they want to be your friend again, then they want to sell you something. All right? It's kind of he talks to them, I believe, as if he's had some kind of communication. We know he had not been to Rome at this point, but had he been to Rome at some point in his life?
He may have previously been there.
Mm-hmm. Maybe. I don't know. That's just assumption on our part. That's all we're doing because there's no writing on that. But just wondering on it. Just makes me think. What other thoughts on that? So the next section here is titled in my Bible, God's Wrath Against Sinful Humanity. And so he goes in from this, hey, how you doing? Here's a praise, here's a prayer, here's a blessing for you. Hey, I can't wait to come see you. Hey, I'm here to preach the gospel to everybody because the gospel is the power and it's the salvation all through this face. And then the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of the people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may have been known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. Why does a man not know how to use a sentence? Right? It just tears me up. So what does he say here in this very first sentence to them? 18 and 19. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godless and wickedness of people. And so, what's being revealed? Wrath. What is wrath?
Anger.
Anger.
Punishment, anger. The NIV here makes an interesting comment. I thought about it. It says, not a petulant, irrational burst of anger such as humans often exhibit, but a wholly just revulsion against what is contrary to and opposes his natural body and will is being revealed. God's wrath is not limited to the end of time judgment of the wicked. Here the wrath of God is his abandonment of the wicked to their sins, the truth about God revealed in the creation order. So it says, those who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain. So basically, here's the truth. It's very plain, very open. You ever looked at anything and said to yourself, it's just very obvious what the truth is. It's very obvious what you see here. There is no question at it. And guess what? These people have chose, right? The godless and wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. They choose to act against it. What does it mean to suppress? When you suppress a fire, what do?
Hold it back.
Holding back.
You're holding it back, right? We're pushing it back. We're holding it down. We're covering it up. We're putting it out, right? Their wickedness and their what? Godlessness. These are the people who are suppressing the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. Who is them? What's that saying? Just read that 2 verses here. It says the truth is revealed. It basically says the truth is revealed to them. They know what the truth is. It's revealed that they understand what the truth is. Yet they have chose to do what?
Suppress it.
Suppress it. They've chose to cover it up. They've chose to ignore it. Who's he talking about?
The Jews.
The Jews. And not just the Jews, but who? Who knows? Within the Jewish people, who should know better? Who studies the law every day?
Sanhedrin.
The teachers.
Pharisees.
Teachers, Pharisees. And he's going to know this because he was what?
He was one of them.
He was one of them. Pharisees, the Sadducees, all the leaders and teachers of the community. They know this, but yet, guess what? He's saying that these godless and wicked people know the truth, but have suppressed it. Who's he talking about? He's talking about the leaders. He's talking about all the people that are in charge. They know what the truth is, but they've chose not to let it out. They've chose to hold back because they should know. Jesus fulfilled every single one of the prophecies that had been made. Who knows the prophecies? They do. So he calls them godless. He calls them wickedness. Now, what is the worst thing a Jew wanted to be called? Argumentatively, would be godless, wouldn't it? Because that's what their entire life has been built upon. The Jews' life built upon this faith and being the chosen people and being the only one that God was turning to. And so guess what? So it's what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen. So when anybody says, I can't prove that God exists. Yes, I can. Look around you. Step out into nature. Just the pure carnal part of nature. Step out into it. There is nothing about nature, nothing that makes sense other than it was created by an all-powerful being. Because when you look at the vascular system of the human and the vascular system of a leaf, they look the same. Uses the same basic concepts. When you look throughout all of the things that we understand about nature and about science, does any of it make any sense that it might be an accident? I don't see it. That's what Paul is telling them. Listen, these people have chose to suppress the truth. They're godless and they're wicked. Because he says, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being being understood from what has been made so that the people are without excuse. You don't have an excuse for saying that God does not exist. Why? Well, no, not even that. Even if you weren't a Jew, because you see, Paul's going to write to both Jew and Greek, and the Greeks don't necessarily understand all of this stuff about God.
It's evident all around you.
It's evident all around you, and everything that you see screams and bleeds a creation of God. That's what he's telling them. Listen, if you don't know basically he's saying, even if you don't know all of the stuff that the Jews know, you should be able to look outside your window and see proof of what? That's why man, I think, seeks so hard to try to explain creation by any other means possible. Because for them to accept a creation by God would mean that they are not the pinnacle of understanding. They're not the pinnacle of power. They don't want to feel like they are, what's the best way to say it? That they are subject to a greater power. So we try to prove God is dead, or the non-existence of God, by trying to get to the very base component. And I'm sorry, the more we study and the more we learn, the more it has to be something more than just accident. Just the random colliding of two atoms. And the random colliding of two cells. That's what he's telling them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. You just don't have a choice. Verse 21, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. What's he saying? For although they knew God. Now this may be a holdback to history. Throughout time, he may not just be talking about Jewish leadership and those that should know better. I think he's talking about everybody. At some point, all of creation knew who God was. Understood his existence. What's he saying here? That they chose to do what? Verse 21 right off the top. For although they knew God. He's leading into, even though they knew better, they still did it. What's he say here? For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Why did it become futile, foolish, darkened hearts? Why? What began to happen? Wouldn't that be false gods? He's talking to the Greeks, Rome. What are they famous for? Gods, tons of gods. But what else? Athens, what are they famous for? Athenians? Thought. And what else? What'd you say? The Olympics. For thinking, for reasoning, for education. Right, they're famous for trying to understand things without who? And the interesting thing is when Paul went to Athens, what did he say? He wandered all around that town and looked at all of the statues and the monuments and the temples to all of these gods. And these people were so on top of things that they actually had a statue to an unknown God just so they would be sure to hit every corner. And so Paul, when he goes to speak to them, I want to talk to you about that unknown God. Because I know that God. See, he doesn't insult them. He doesn't make fun of them. He doesn't pick on them. He says, I see that you are intelligent people. I see that you are religious people. But let me tell you about this one over here that you don't quite have a name for. Let me tell you about that God. And he was so moving to these highly intelligent people, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle type people, that they found him very interesting. Some wanted to hear more, some didn't, but they were intrigued by what he had to say. Paul was able to move them. But he's saying, listen, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, because their thinking became futile and foolish hearts were darkened. Futility is wasting your time. Isn't it? What you've done is, it's just futile. It's futility. Spend all this time doing all this for nothing. Paul's telling them that all their study of all these other things and all this learning and all this education. Look, I've got a lot of education, right? Some of it's futile. Some of it's beneficial. But nothing compares to the education that I need as it comes to understanding who God is. He's telling them that all of this study and all this trying to understand, all this learning that they've done, really it's futile because all it's done, and it's foolish. See, they had a problem calling people fools back then. It was insulting to call somebody foolish. But he tells them it's futile, it's foolish, and it's darkened your what? What did it darken their hearts against? Oh, well, I can go with truth or God. So they're over markers. It darkened their hearts against God, against the truth. Because if you refer all that back to that truth, they knew better. They chose to suppress it. They refused to give God glory, refused to worship Him, refused to accept His creation, even though it's clearly written all around them on every single thing growing on this planet. Yet they chose to study the foolish things of this world and allowed their hearts to turn dark against God. Sound like our country? We're so worried about science. We're so worried about education that it turns us away from really worrying about what we need to worry about. It's interesting. It's an interesting thought. Where are we at? 21, 22. Said, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory for the immortal. They changed the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. And so he's actually gets very specific, does he not? What's he talking about? What were the Athenians studying? Every god known to man. Right? That was the interesting thing about Rome. The interesting thing about Romans in general. Romans didn't care who you were. Romans didn't care what you liked. Romans didn't care what you wanted to study, didn't care who your God was. They wanted two things out of you. They wanted you not to cause trouble and to pay taxes. As long as you didn't cause trouble and paid taxes, you could do whatever you wanted to do. And typically, see, they were polytheistic. They were not monotheistic. They didn't believe in one God. They would just absorb the culture of whoever it is they conquered. So they would bring in their God. And so when you get to Athens, Athens has statues of all of these different gods spread around because they don't want to miss anything. And he's telling them what? You have done all this. You have understood who God is. You have understood that He's created everything. Just open your eyes, man, and look around you to everything in this world. But guess what? They claimed to be wise, but they were fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images. They made all of these statues to themselves and turned God away. Talking about all these people around. He's giving kind of a history lesson of things that have happened. And so, because of their foolishness, because of their thinking they were wise, because of their chasing and following of all of these other deities and all these other things and turning away from truly understanding, even though it's very plain to see that God created everything, here's what God did, verse 24, because he recaps what he said at the top of that, verse 18. Therefore God gave them over in sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth. Now that's interesting. What did that say? All of you read that if you have your Bibles. Read that that verse 24. Because of their turning against God and refusing to accept His immortal power and His dominance, or if you want to say it like that, God gave them over to their sinful desires, which turned out to be what?
Degrading.
It's eventually going to talk about homosexuality.
Yeah.
He basically just let them go.
Just let them do whatever they want. He just stepped out of the way. You ever known your kid going to do something stupid? And when they go to do something stupid, you go. And then they do something stupid? And then what do? Maybe you shouldn't do that. Isn't that kind of what God did here? God said, because of their unwillingness to listen to and follow what is plainly, blatantly obvious in the world, He just kind of let them make their own choice. Therefore, God gave them over in their sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. Now, argumentatively, the Bible is written in the understood he. So the Bible is technically being written to who? It was written from a male perspective to males. So when it says that they gave themselves over to one another, what may he be speaking of? Well, flip over here to 26. What's he say? Verse 25, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator who is forever praised. Now, it's interesting to note, right? They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than men. The Creator who is forever praised. Talking about building altars and statues and what are they called? Idols. Thank you. Nobody said it, but whatever. Amen. 26, because of this, God gave them over to shamefulness. Now, when it started in verse 24, He just turned them over to what? Sinful desires of sexual immorality. What has happened now? Do you see how it steadily gets a little bit worse? The things that have occurred? 26, because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Not just lusts, but what is defined as shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. See? Do you see that? Because now he patterns out the women. Do you see that? What's he referring to back here in 24? Homosexuality. To the point where he even pulls out to say that women also, because the Bible is written to the male perspective. No matter how much the NIV tries to shift it to a him, her, he, she concept, the Bible is specifically written from the male perspective. It's written to males because males were the dominant of the society back then. They were the ones that brought their faith to the family. Does that make sense?
They were also some of the most educated, and more of them knew how to read.
Yeah, and most of the women were never taught, right? And so, look at this. Verse 26, because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. Which makes me believe that he has already hinted at the other. In the same way, the men also abandoned, he flips over to their abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. What is a result of turning away from God?
Sin. More of it.
It's going to be an unpopular opinion. Maybe, maybe not. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Paul is telling them that their homosexual behavior is a punishment from God. Do you read that? Do you read that in there? He gave them over to shameful lusts. He gave them over to their own carnal, spiritual, how does he say it there? Degrading their bodies with one another. Not just sexual immorality, but homosexual sexual immorality. He is pushing that button pretty hard. And it all ties back to where? To verse 24, which then returns back to 21. 21 says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified Him as God nor gave thanks to Him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. They claimed to be wise, but were fools and exchanged the glory of immortal God for their own idols. That's paraphrasing. Therefore, God gave them over to their sexual immorality. Skip over to 26 and 27. That women had sex with women and men had sex with men. All of that is a direct result of their turning away from God. Do you see that? Paul's hammering this into them. Because history tells us that the Roman Empire was just awash with homosexuality. And it was probably starting to sneak in where? What are we dealing with in churches today? We're several thousand years later, and we're dealing with the same thing that chances are Paul is talking about right here. Why would he bring it up if it's not a problem? And it's all tied back to they're turning away from God. They're turning to idols, because idols, a lot of the gods that they turned to, those gods were based on sexual immorality. The Baal gods were huge sexually oriented idols. It was all about the physical. It was all about the pleasure. It was all about what made you feel good. So he's hammering that. So we'll end there at 27, and we'll pick up next week. Sound good? All right. Thank you, guys. Big Rob, it's good to see you.